Well, hello everyone. My name is Justin Wu. I'm a first year medical student at the University of Missouri, Kansas City, and the co-vice president of KAMSA. And with me today is Justin.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Justin Park, and I'm the advocacy chair of KAMSA.
And today we have Dr. Edwin Choy. Um, Dr. Choy, thank you again for agreeing to be on the podcast and having a quick chat with us. Would to kind of start off, would you like to kind of introduce yourself, your background, how you got into medicine, and yeah, we can go from there.
Okay, great. So, as you said, Justin, my name is Edwin Choy. Please call me Edwin if you want to here. I want to be as informal as possible. So just a quick background on me. I was actually born in South Korea, and my family immigrated when I was 3 years old. I grew up in California, and I stayed in California until end of high school. I went to college at Yale, med school at NYU. I got an MD PhD there. And then I did the rest of my medical training here in Boston, where I did my medicine residency at Mass General Hospital, and then fellowship at Dana-Farber, Mass General Combined Fellowship Program in Oncology. And I've been an oncologist here at Mass General Brigham for the past 20 years now.
Yeah, that's wow, that's it's definitely very impressive kind of career and path to medicine. But I just kind of wanted to ask, so you mentioned you were an MD PhD. Was there anything that made you kind of commit to that route, especially with medicine research? Was there anything, I guess, growing up or anything that where you were interested, kind of on the path to an MD PhD?
Yeah, so I've always leaned toward being a scientist and a PhD, and I was always fascinated by discovery. And so when I was in college, I actually tried really hard to be a more pure scientist. And so I tried my hand at pure math, tried my hand at physics. And then even in the humanities, there was a time when I thought I might major in English or philosophy. And so I was very much like a paper and pencil and like think through things kind of person. And so when I went to medical school, I felt like I wasn't really finished being a scientist or trying to make basic discoveries. And so that's where I think the PhD was very helpful for me. I was able to spend a couple extra years just completely immersed in scientific thought and discovery and planning experiments, doing experiments, and it really, fulfilled a part of my brain and my soul that I really wanted to give a good try.
Wow. Yeah, definitely. I guess for me personally, I took physics in high school and I didn't enjoy it too much. But I know definitely the kind of the research and things can be very interesting. Um, I saw that you're the director of the Sarcoma clinical research program, I believe. I was wondering if you can speak a little bit more about that, on your experience and how you got involved in that.
So coming to my medical residency and fellowship training with a MD PhD, um, a lot of my mentors and peers really felt like I should be going to a life of laboratory research. And I thought so too. And so as part of my fellowship training, I did several years of postdoc work at a combined MIT Harvard program. And so at the end of my postdoc was when I really decided that I want to plant my flag on clinical oncology rather than laboratory research. I was looking for a disease group to really align with. And at the time, sarcoma was very interesting uh, because there was a new drug that just came out called imatinib, which really revolutionized how we treat cancers in general. Before the days of imatinib, we largely treated cancers with um, standard, typical, conventional chemotherapy. And so those were IV drugs that work by attacking the DNA of cancer cells. And those are the drugs that you sort of see movies about that make you lose your hair, that make you throw up, that make you just feel terrible. And whereas imatinib was a pill that you take at home, and it was amazing to watch this pill really shrink and control a type of sarcoma called GIST. And so once I saw that happening, I felt like the rest of my career could be devoted to exploring or developing new drugs that were not more standard chemotherapies. And so it was a way of applying all the science that I was trained for, um, but using it more directly in humans in terms of drug development. And so I found that to be very exciting.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing. Like, it's kind of crazy. I remember learning about imatinib in my textbooks, but just to seeing like someone like really like involved and leading that process is amazing to hear. And like speaking of the fact that you're like in a leadership role, do you also have like any like projects or any new like drug that you came up with that was like your most proud accomplishment?
So I'm proud of sort of my entirety body of work, but I work very collaboratively, and we're in a time where one person doesn't really develop a drug, so first you have a drug that's being developed either in a laboratory at an academic center or at a drug company. And then when the drug looks interesting, then they have to sort of pass on the drug to what we call preclinical scientists. And their job is to test the drug on animals, mice, rabbits, dogs, and try to see if the drug actually does what it's supposed to do, which is to shrink tumor and treat cancers. And so once we think that's promising, then the drug is sent back to the chemists where they try to make the drug um, more fit for human use. And then once a drug that seems to work in an animal model is fit for human use, then we employ another team of doctors and scientists called phase one oncologists. And they're the doctors who uh, put these drugs into humans for the very first time. And so often we call them first in human clinical trials. And so once those are done, then we go to phase two drugs. And that's where I pick up. So a lot of the clinical trials that I write and design or that I participate in are phase two drugs. And so they really piggyback on the hard work of all the basic laboratory scientists and the phase one scientists. And then when the phase two drugs are being conducted, when the phase two trials are being conducted, often the trials are conducted across multiple hospitals across the country, or sometimes even across different continents. And so it's always teamwork and a big collaboration. And so the drugs that I've been part of, I would never say I'm the one who developed it or invented it. Far from it. But I am part of the team that where that in the clinical trial setting, I was able to study how the drug works in patients. And so looking back, I can think of 8 or 9 drugs that I've helped be part of their development. And so just being part of all of that makes me pretty proud.
Yeah, thank you so much. And that's must be leading a lot of impact in the field, especially since I know the field of oncology is always advancing at a rapid rate. And speaking of like the clinical trials you mentioned as well, like I understand sometimes if you have a new medication that comes on that like access might be difficult for a lot of patients to have. So I wanted to ask from more of a global health perspective, like do you see like the differences in like sarcoma care like internationally or domestically? And how do you feel like US trainees can learn with like that global health perspective?
Yeah, so there's a lot of different things packed in that question. So first of all, in the United States, if a drug becomes successful, success means it becomes approved by the FDA. And so when a drug is FDA approved, typically Medicare also approves it. And all the other insurance companies tend to follow what Medicare does. And so FDA approval of a drug leads to Medicare approval, leads to insurance approval, which means basically anyone who has insurance, they should be covered to take the drug. And then when a drug is new, companies often come out with a patient assistance program so that even when insurance companies are slow to approve and adopt, the drug companies themselves will often be eager to provide the drug for free or for cheap for patients who can't afford it or don't have the insurance for it. So in the United States, we're pretty lucky in that most people who need an FDA-approved drug will have some kind of access to it. That's very different for other parts of the world. And so, for example, in Europe, the European version of the FDA, they often have two layers of approval. One is a layer of approval where you are just allowed to use a drug. But then they have a second approval, which involves whether or not the countries that can actually support reimbursement for use of the drug. And so often what you see in Europe is you see a drug get their first layer of approval, but not the second, because it's not cost effective or it's too costly. And so we do have a lot of drugs in the United States, which a lot of people in Europe cannot have access to. And then you go beyond Europe, like Asia and Africa, and it's much worse. And so sometimes I'm involved in teleconferences with different African countries. And it's actually pretty sad because, when you hear about a case being presented, my instinct is to say, well, let's get an MRI or a CAT scan. Let's see what that shows. And the answer is we don't have a CAT scan here. So we'll have to just do an X-ray and measure the tumor by X-ray, which is often not good enough. And so yeah, you're on the right track. I think the problem with a lot of the underserved countries is actually resources, right? Like, what is the point of being able to give someone a few pills of a cancer drug when what they really need is to take the cancer drug for the rest of their life? So that's a problem that's bigger than what I think I'm equipped to handle. I think a lot of it is political and financial and economic. And so from a pure medical side, I think we're coming up with a lot of these new drugs, but it's a whole separate problem to figure out how we can let the rest of the world have access to this.
Yeah, that's definitely something that's an interesting point to kind of think about. But um, you mentioned, I guess, kind of global um, therapies and trying to bring these therapies to other countries. I was wondering if you were involved in any kind of global work or like medical missions where I guess you go to another country, and I'm just wondering how your experience with that was because that's something that I'm personally interested in. I think it'd be a really, really cool opportunity to go to another country and see how the healthcare system works and be able to try and kind of help the best that we can in other countries. So just wondering if you can speak about your experience.
My experience in global healthcare is actually pretty small, very minimal. Um, I know my hospital, National Hospital, they have lots of relationships helping develop hospitals in China and consulting on different countries in Africa. The little bit of involvement that I've had involved using teleconferencing technology to basically hear sarcoma cases from doctors in Botswana. And so they would have a patient with a large sarcoma, but they may not have a sarcoma expert, within their town or neighborhood, or even their part of the country. And so those are cases where they would present to us, and we might sometimes even be lucky enough to be able to look at their pathology slides and have our own pathologist comment on the slides and help make the diagnosis. And then I would do the best I can to talk about how we would manage a case like this in the United States. But then, we would always have to sort of go back to figuring out how we can translate that kind of management to something that's more feasible in the country of Botswana. And so that's where I say, I may want an MRI or a CAT scan, but they can only get an X-ray. And then, I may want, different types of fancy chemotherapies, but then they can only provide, the basic drugs that they have available. So it's really working with them over this teleconference to try to figure out how, despite not having, the cutting edge resources that I have, how can we still try to give their patients the best care possible? But that's, I think that's a very, very small involvement. In no way can I say that I participate in any type of global oncology ventures. That's just not where my focus has been throughout my career.
Yeah, well, thank you. Yeah, that was just something I was kind of personally curious about to see if you have any experience with kind of global health and things of that nature. I just want to ask, since you're very involved in like the clinical research as well as the medicine practice of things, I was wondering if there's anything that you've seen that has been interesting for different ethnicities or different populations, especially as it relates to sarcoma. Because I know for Korean Americans that colon cancer has been a big issue, especially within the Korean population. So I was wondering if there's anything that you've seen with maybe sarcomas or any other types of cancers, tumors that you find in your practice or in clinical research.
Yeah, so two comments on that. First is colon cancer, yes, but I think more um, focus on Korean American population is gastric cancer. So I think
Right.
Koreans in Korea definitely have several-fold higher risk of stomach cancer than non-Koreans living in the United States. And then I think for Korean Americans who live in the United States, I think their risk of gastric cancer may be pretty variable depending on how closely tied they are to being Korean in Korea. So that's one thing. I would say, like, if I thought Korean Americans had a particular elevation of risk, it would be more stomach cancer and a little bit less so colon cancer. Having said that, I think so. One interesting type of treatment that I've been involved with is a treatment called Tecelra, Tecelra, Tecelra. And it's basically you take a patient with a type of sarcoma called synovial sarcoma, and we can extract their T cells, which is a type of white blood cell, their immune system. And in the laboratory, we can re-engineer the DNA of the T cells to target a protein called MAGE-A4, MAGE-A4. And the problem with it, once we re-engineer the T cells, we can actually infuse the T cells back into the patient and watch the patient's own re-engineered immune cells attack the cancer. And in doing that, you actually have about a 40% response rate. And in patients who respond, you have often half of those patients have a durable response to treatment. And so this is an amazing breakthrough for patients with an otherwise terminal type of cancer. But the problem with this whole technology is whenever you employ T cells in this way, you also need to develop your T cells to work with a certain type of immune system called HLA phenotype. And so the company that made Tecelra designed their product to particularly work with an HLA-A2 subtype, which is only common in the white Caucasian population. And so if you're not Caucasian, you have a very low chance of having the correct HLA type to be able to benefit from this type of therapy. So this is an example where I think, even though the drug companies themselves, they're not out to have racial bias, but because, they're looking to treat a US population, they design their treatments to target a largely Caucasian population. And there's lots of financial and other reasons why they would think to do that. So I try to think that they're not just evil and doing it because they're racist. I don't think that's the case. But it is, it's a situation where I think more and more as we go more into immunotherapy and as we develop more products that employ the immune system, we're going to have to think about trying to be more equitable in terms of what type of immune subtypes that we want to be able to target to treat.
Yeah, thank you so much for clarifying that. And it was very interesting to just hear like the fact that like the HLA phenotype was mainly oriented towards like the Caucasian population. So it's really important to point out that there are some like disparities in that manner. And I want to focus on I guess like more of your academic background again. Like you mentioned you went to Yale and then MGH and then Dana-Farber. So since you had like extensive like tenure as like an academic physician, what are like some advice you have for like med students that are watching this podcast, especially when they're preparing for residency applications and like preparing for interviews? Like, what are some things you recommend and give advice for like future like residents?
Yeah, I think the best thing to do is to take one step at a time, right? So if you're taking a step but thinking about 10 steps ahead, then you're going to stumble and fall. And so when you're in med school, I recommend trying to figure out what's most fascinating to you and what you find most fulfilling at the moment. And so expose yourself to lots of different types of medical practices and give everything a chance. Right now you may think you're not interested in rheumatology or you might not be interested in dermatology or ophthalmology, but then when you do an elective, you'll actually know what the practice of doing those subspecialties feel like, and you may fall in love with it. And so as a med student, I think the hardest thing to do is to really pick a field that you're going to feel very devoted to and happy to do for the next 40 years of your career. And then when you're in residency, you want to try to get into a good fellowship, but you won't do that unless you do a good job at the moment, right? And so I think being as genuine and authentic to who you are at the moment, I think is very important. And then try to be present and enjoy every step of the way. And so one thing I think about myself when I look at my training is I really enjoyed my training. Every year of med school, I look back and I remember just feeling privileged and having a lot of joy and fun in doing what I was doing. And then in residency, every patient I saw, it was a privilege to be their doctor, right? Because they were letting me train on them. And so yeah, I just look back at my training and I think what helped me was I tried as hard as I can to be present at the moment and try to live as authentically as I could, one day at a time.
Yeah, I think a lot of our viewers will appreciate that advice, like taking it one step at a time and being authentic and genuine with our interests. And well, when you were in med school, like how did you decipher like which specialty that you'd like pick in the future, as well as like do you have any advice on like things that med students should also look into for which students or which specialties they should commit to?
Yeah, I'm not sure I have good advice on that. So, because I did an MD PhD, after my 2 years of med school, after my first 2 years of med school, I spent about 3.5 years in the laboratory working on my PhD. And as soon as my PhD was done, I only had about 15 months of med school left to do. And so I didn't really have a lot of choices in terms of electives. So instead, I fully took advantage of the different rotations that was required for me to take. And so I did the required rotations. And then in terms of what helped me decide where to go in terms of residency, because of my PhD, I did my PhD in basic science, trying to study a group of proteins called GTPases. And it turns out those proteins are very important in different medical subspecialties like cancer, rheumatology, allergy, and immunology. And so those are all medical subspecialties. So it was pretty natural for me to go from med school to an internal medicine residency because I felt like no matter what kind of laboratory I set up in the future or what kind of research I do, I think medicine was the field where I would be most likely to employ the techniques that I learned during my PhD.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for sharing. That was very interesting with you only had like 15 months before you graduated after your PhD. So I'm sure it'd probably be a big rush to get rotations done and everything like that. Um, so I guess just kind of to sum up, looks like we're kind of coming up on time, but is there anything else that you'd like to share? Any kind of advice that you would have for the next generation of medical students? Anything that you'd like to share for Korean Americans or just any medical students across the country?
I feel like the future is going to be very different. The way we're practicing medicine right now is frankly unsustainable. Uh, you know, Medical care just costs too much money. So, if you're a big company, right, like let's say you're Amazon or Google, you're probably devoting 20, 30, 40% of 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 your money to healthcare for your employees. And so at some point the money is just not going to work out anymore. And and so I think there's going to be big changes. And it's going to make, what we think of as doctoring very different. And so, for people here who are either med students or pre-med students, I want you to look at a future of like what happens when things look very different. And then you can also be part of making it different in a way that you want it to also, right? And so, if I think if we let others create the changes, then we may see changes that, end up being pretty draconian and uh, being very elitist or excluding a lot of sectors of our population. Whereas if you already know today that like that's a possibility, you can start now and try to help be part of the solution than just victims of whatever is to come. So yes, I think we're headed for a huge change. Whether it's going to be 2 years from now or 10 years from now, I think the change is coming.
Yeah, that's very very, very insightful, and it's something I haven't really thought about. But yeah, it makes a lot of sense to recognize that early and to take change whenever possible. And definitely, yeah, the future of medicine seems to be heading in a very different direction. So I guess we'll see what happens in the next couple of years. But
Yeah,
um,
for example, like, you look right now and you see all these doctor offices and you see, there are these like, you know, dermatologists and ophthalmologists, and they're all like doing their thing, and they all have these small private practices. Nothing is going to look like that in 20 years. It's all going to be so different. And I don't know how. It could be, one big corporation could be doing everything, or maybe AI will take over and do a lot of the functions that we are doing right now. Or maybe we'll employ a different class of doctors called DOs and NPs and PAs that are going to end up being the primary care for most of our patients. So yeah, so I'm sorry to interject, but I
no, no, yeah, that was I guess something that I know I've changed over the years from going from like a paper charting to more of like an electronic medical record and kind of consolidating that. And yeah, definitely, it seems like there is going to be, or there's more of a shift towards like bigger hospitals and bigger corporations instead of private clinics. So yeah, but yeah, thank you for sharing that insight. That's definitely very interesting. Um, but yeah, if Justin, do you have any more questions? Any more thoughts?
Yeah, I just want to say like thank you for coming on our podcast. I'm pretty sure this will be really insightful, especially for like the next generation of Korean American physicians, and just like sharing your journey. It sounds like a huge inspiration for people to look up to. So again, appreciate it for making your time here.
My pleasure.
Well, I guess Justin, you can stop recording.